Just to let everybody know, for those of you that aren't on Zoom very often, I feel like we've all probably had experience now that we've been Zoom bound for the last year, but you guys can move your screens around. So if there's certain people you're paying attention to or that are talking often, like Graham or I, you can actually grab a hold of their screen or their box and move it to the top so you see it all the time. And then on the upper right hand corner, you can change the view for speaker view or everybody. When you are on or when Graham is speaking, keep your mics on mute so that we don't get background noise and aren't disrupting. When you do want to jump in and chat, feel free to raise your hand. We can call you up or put your comments in the comment section or your chat in the comment section. This is casual. When you do open up your mic to speak, careful, just ask your question and then pass it on. We don't want a lot of runaway mics. After about an hour, I try to be respectful of time. I'm not sure where Graham is with you for time, but I will stay on after and allow you guys to continue conversation and chat for a while. I have about an hour, and so it allows us or you guys time to network a little bit as well. With that being said, I would love to have you guys join or support Global Hemp Association. We are a membership-based organization. It gives you access to the hemp hallway. There is a freemium model. It's limited. You don't get access to the groups or some of the chats. As a member, you get access to all the transcribed notes, meeting notes, groups, discounts. We're going to start doing a lot of private events, initiatives, and things like that. And then I think the biggest tool is when you leave here, you have a chat option where you can actually connect with people. And so all of our members are available. And then without that further ado, Graham, I'll turn it over to you and have to give big thanks. I really, really appreciate you joining and appreciate all 50 of the others that are on this call. So thank you very much for doing that or for spending your time with us. And if you guys need anything, like I said, raise your hand or feel free to drop comments here in the bottom. Graham, I'll turn it over to you if you want to give an intro and kind of take it from here.
Right, okay. So my name's Graham Durrant and I'm a hempcrete contractor. I've been working with hempcrete since 2012. So I suppose I'm going to tell you a little bit about how it came to be. I started off, I was living in France and I first came across hempcrete in about 2004, something like that. Thought it was a potentially very good way to build. And then I wanted to come back to the UK and champion a green building material. So I came back and did a master's in sustainable architecture, did all my research, and it sort of confirmed for me that hempcrete was a pretty fabulous way to build. So came back, did my master's, and then I worked for the Limecrete company, who were the main contractors in the UK at the time. They no longer do hempcrete, but started working for them and then set my own business up sort of in the last, I don't know, about 4 years ago. So it's a very small business. The business really is me. And we go out, we travel all over the country, building new builds and renovations, just one at a time. I do something between 10 and 20 builds a year. So I suppose we're looking at, I've maybe done something like 120 to 140 hempcrete builds, I should think, in the last few years. And that's pretty much who I am.
Awesome. So you've sent me some pictures. I don't know if you kind of want to just take it from here and as questions come in. When you're ready to share pictures, I'm happy to thumb through them. You just let me know what works best for you.
Well, if you show that picture of the one the building I finished on Friday, that one, the big wall.
Yeah.
I think people may be interested to see what hempcrete can do.
Is this the right one?
No, it's the big hall. It's the interior shot of a big old timber frame. That one, that build, I finished that on Friday. That's a 14th century. Some of that building dates back to the 14th century. So the walls there, they're hempcrete walls. They're about in imperial, about 5 inches, five inches thick, those walls. And the wall at the very end that's got the diagonal bracing on, that wall didn't exist in any form up until about 3 weeks ago. Now, I know it looks fairly old, but we built the timber frame and then we infilled it with hempcrete. So That wall was completely rebuilt. The others, you can see the other walls there have been, the timber frame was repaired and then infilled. The original infill was wattle and daub, so all the wattle and daub was taken out and hempcrete put back. So yes.
Pretty cool. This is the exterior of the same building?
No, that's another building that I did. I did that 2 or 3 years ago. Again, that actually on my website, that's one of the featured buildings. So there's quite a lot of information on that build and how we did it and what the wall build up was, that sort of thing.
Where do people find that, Graham?
If they go to my website, which is hemplimespray.co.uk, so that the name of the company is Hemp Lime Spray. But essentially, if you Google spraying hempcrete, I will be not quite the only person that comes up, but pretty much. So there are very few people in the world that do what I do. That was another job. That was I don't know, 4 or 5 years ago. Very sort of modernist approach.
Where is the hemp here?
It's all behind that cladding.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think that there's one more picture in this email that oh yeah, here.
Yeah, so that's another renovation. That was an old chapel. So the alcoves in the chapel there's actually 3 of them. So we were spraying, I'm just converting it to imperial, 7 inches of hempcrete over all the stone walls. And so we effectively rebuilt the alcoves 7 inches further out. And there are pictures of the finished alcoves on the website in the gallery. It might be worth people looking through just the gallery on the website. There's a whole host of the different builds that I've been involved in.
There's a lot. Do you want me to keep thumbing through these pictures that we have here for everyone?
Yeah, that's fine. I mean, you know, if anybody's got any question, I mean, I can tell you a little bit about the history of hempcrete in the UK, because I think for people that are looking to get into hempcrete, and particularly the construction side, I think there's possibly a few things to learn from the mistakes that we made over here, because, you know, of course, there were a lot of mistakes made in the early days. So, you know, I'd be happy to talk a little bit about the UK hemp industry, hempcrete industry, and what it's got right and what it's got wrong.
I would love to hear that. Right.
So the UK hempcrete industry, the first building was built in the UK in about 1999. That was the very first building. And by that time, it had been it was starting to become established in France. It had been invented sort of 20 years earlier, slowly trickled down. We built the first one in 1999. And then there was a company was set up essentially that just attracted a lot of investors to promote hempcrete. But they were a company called Lime Technology, but they set themselves up as shopkeepers. So they were selling hemp and they were selling the binder, the lime binder, to make the hempcrete. And I think in a way that was perhaps their biggest mistake, because they never ever got reliable installers. And I think the thing with hempcrete, it's only water, lime binder and hemp. But you'd be amazed how many different people can put that into a building in different ways that don't work. It's a very robust material, but it's very easy to get wrong or put in inappropriately. And so Lime Technology spent quite a lot of time. They used to run a 1-day training course, but you can't learn it all in a day, really. And then they'd spend a lot of time going around firefighting, trying to work out, you know, where the building went wrong and whose responsibility it was. So I think anybody that's interested in actually building buildings or investing in building with hempcrete, the crucial bit is to control the installation process. If you control the installation process, it's very smooth, it all goes well. In the sort of 9-10 years I've been doing this, I've never had to go back to a job with any problems. I've never ever had a phone call to say, oh, can you come back, there's been a problem. And if you control that, then it's the most amazing building material that you'll ever find. It really is as good as they say it is. So once Lime Technology carried on, they carried on working until about 2008, because essentially They got a lot of investors involved. Lots of people put a lot of money in. Then the crash in 2008 happened. And then the company kind of dwindled a little bit. The buyers that they had hoped to be bought out by a large European company, and the buyers fell through. And so eventually Lime Technology, the people that brought Hempcrete to the UK, they finished trading in 2014. And the architect responsible for that first building that came to the UK is a man called Ralph Carpenter. And he was the man that actually came up with the word Hempcrete. Before that, it was called Hemp Lime. And although it seemed like a very good idea at the time, actually the word Hempcrete has become incredibly misleading because people immediately assume it's a replacement for concrete. But actually it really isn't a replacement for concrete. There's very few times when you would put hempcrete in place of concrete. So it's become sort of a blessing because it's easy to say and people have some idea it's a building material. But it's also become something that we're constantly saying to people, no, you can't make a sidewalk out of it. You can't put it below grade. You know, there's several things you really can't do with it that you could do very well with concrete.
Interesting. We have a couple of questions. Herman, you want to ask a real quick question? And then Laura.
Yes. Graham, when you have a 10 centimeter wall, how much insulation you have then with hemp and lime?
Well, so well, unfortunately, in Europe, well, you'll understand U values in Europe. But in America, you use R values, don't you? And they don't, I haven't actually sat here and translated them, but the K value of hempcrete, which is what gives it its R value, the K value is 0.07. So you could do the calculation to work out what the U value would be. But those walls, the walls I showed you on that picture of the very old hall, the reason they're so thin, I mean, they're unusually thin. Obviously, the new builds that we build are sort of 15, the walls are 15 inches thick or, 360 millimeters thick. But when we're dealing with those old buildings, because of the conservation value, I mean, that particular building is listed, it's historically a really important building. That framing is a really unusual port barn framing. So we're in a situation where the U value, the performance you'll get from that thin wall is very good for a thin wall, but it's not at all what we would expect, in a normal building. We'd be much thicker than that. So that's on the thinnest end of the spectrum of what I would normally install.
What was the name of the gentleman that you said that came up with hempcrete?
His name was Ralph Carpenter.
Ralph.
Yeah. So he's retired now, but he was actually a very charismatic man, and I think a lot of the reason why hempcrete came to the UK was, because he was pushing it, and he did a very good job. I did lots of work for him, and a lot of the builds that he did, I did for him. But he was very experimental, so which was good in a way, but it was experiments at the client's expense, which was not quite so good. But we certainly pushed the boundaries of the material.
Okay, so I'm going to let Laura go real quick, and then I'll follow up. Gary has a really good question about those good and bad lessons. So, Laura, go ahead.
So my question has to do with the binder for hempcrete, and in general, and a lot of most of the construction and most of the hempcrete companies are in cold climates that have inclement weather. I live in a place that has a large swath of arid climate here, the desert, and the Middle East in general is very dry and much hotter than where most of hempcrete is used. So my question is, do you have any experience with using different binders for different climates, or does everyone just do the same thing no matter where they are?
So what I'd say is, I've got a couple of people that I've been helping in Israel to build. I do a lot of kind of Skype meetings in the evenings after work with people all over the world, helping them solve sort of problems for their builds. And what I would say is, of the binders that the standard hempcrete binders that you could buy in Europe, Tradical or Batichon would be fine. I would avoid Prompt from Vicat is another binder, and that's a natural cement, not a lime, but it's a very good hempcrete binder. But I would avoid Prompt in really hot countries, because at 25 degrees it will set in about 90 seconds without a retarder put in. So you use citric acid as a retarder, but even with the retarder in it, it still sets too quickly for those kind of conditions. But any of the binders, I mean, we've got myself and Will Stanix, who wrote the Hempcrete book. We've developed our own binder in the UK. You know, that it's only available from Will and I. We haven't actually gone live with it. We're actually, the truth of it is, we're not terribly good businessmen. We're sort of mainly interested in buildings. So we've got a binder. It works very well, and it would work very well in the Middle East, as would Tradical and Batichon. And eventually we will sort of advertise it. But essentially, I'd say the binders you would avoid would be Prompt, and the other binder that I would say you should avoid is a pure hydrated lime binder. If it's just a pure hydrated lime with no additives, chances are because when the hemp is mixed with it, the hemp is really dry, what you'll get is what we call water robbery. So the hemp will absorb the water that needs to sit with the hydrated lime to cause it to carbonate. So that would be a binder to avoid as well. But so I would go for there's three main binders: Batichon, Tradical, and we haven't actually come up with a name yet for our binder. But they're the three that I'd recommend for that climate.
Thank you. Very complete answer. I didn't catch all the names, but I can contact you afterwards.
Okay, you can. Yeah, no worries. Yeah.
Somebody else asked also about these being recorded. They are recorded and transcribed. We have a whole team that takes notes and transcribes. And so we can help distribute and get those to you guys as well. But they are on our Hemp hallway. And all of our past 400 hours of these, you guys. So they're searchable. There's lots of content available. So I would love to help. Okay, so there's a question about specs, ideal specs and dimensions for hemp hurd used for hempcrete applications.
Yeah, on the side, well, I've used hemp hurd from the finest of fine hemp hurd right the way through to sort of hemp hurd that's really been very badly processed and it's got sort of virtually almost little sticks in. There is a sort of an industry standard, and I can find it for you and post it, sort of put it out there somewhere. Mostly it's from probably 3/4 of an inch or 20 mil downwards, and what you tend to get by the time the biggest bits are 20 millimeters or 3/4 of an inch long and down from that, but then you undersieve it to take the dust out. And pretty much if you get a load of hemp and you bash it up and you bash it so the biggest bit is 20 mil and then you take the dust off the bottom, pretty much that hempcrete will be good to go. In terms of quality for hemp, the quality aspect is, as a general rule, the more golden the hemp is, the better quality it is considered to be. And the reason for that is when the hemp is harvested and the hemp and the fiber want to separate the hemp and the fiber, so they'll use a process called retting, which is essentially leaving it in a field to start to break down. So there's some microbial action that starts to separate the fiber out from the main stalks. Well, if it's retted for too long, then it goes a browner color, and that really what it means is it's had more microbial action. The surface of the hemp is slightly more broken down, and therefore it's more prone to giving off dust, which in itself is not a big problem, but you do need to get the bulk of that dust out to, once you've processed it, you undersieve it. So color's important. The other thing I would say, so you've got size, color, and then the fiber content. So you want as little fiber in there as you can. If you're spraying hempcrete, and I spray probably 75% of my work is sprayed, the other 25% is hand cast. If you're spraying, you need better quality hemp and less fibre in than if you're hand casting. If you're hand casting, you can get away with essentially quite poor quality hemp, or what we would consider poor quality. And if there are bigger lumps in it, what you could say is, although it's more of a pain to actually make hempcrete from, what you could say is the stalk, the particle size being that bit bigger, arguably could insulate better. So even a poor quality hemp could actually, in terms of comfort value and long-term, the long-term nature of the building, you would be fine to build like that, but it would be more difficult to build.
Okay, great question. And thanks, Graham, again, for diving into some of these. There was another question about the good and the bad that you have found with local building codes. And then I'm kind of curious about, advice moving forward, especially here in the US, where building codes differ based on county.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, you face a particular problem that we don't have in the UK, and we're all pretty much under the same climate zone here. So although the Scottish building regulations are different to the English building regulations, there's not big differences. And I was extremely lucky that I came into the industry in 2012 just as Lime Technology, the ones that started it all in the UK, were leaving the industry. And so they had done all the hard work of getting it through building regulations. So by the time I came on the scene, it was, although there were still questions posed by building regulations, but it had local authority building control approval, which is, well, it serves, basically it's the service of insurability. When it's past that, then people can get insurance on it. And the thing is, I inherited that, so I didn't have to work very hard there. I was very lucky. But the building regulations people now, mostly all they want to know is, what is its R value, as you would say. So once you've told them it's this R value or that R value, sometimes they're concerned because there's no membrane. The building regulations, quite often they get very concerned if there's no membrane, because the concept of breathability in the construction industry is very poorly understood. And so I have to sort of talk them through, give them examples about, breathability works in the same way your clothes dry on the washing line. They dry quickly on a hot, windy day, and they dry more slowly on a damp, still day. But the fact is, they still dry. And that's what buildings will do. They will always dry out because essentially the relative humidity inside the building is higher than it is outside over the course of a year. So they're always drying to the outside, and that's how the frame is protected. So you sort of talk them through that, and sometimes it's quite pitiful how little the building regs inspectors, who are supposed to have some grasp of building physics, it's quite sad quite often how little they actually understand. But mostly those conversations lead to it being accepted. So I've certainly never had a build that didn't go through, but sometimes you have to argue your case a little bit more. And I think and I know because you have earthquake zones as well, of course, which is something that we don't have to contend with over here. So I can see why the American building codes, they're a lot more complicated and perhaps more bureaucratic. We have a very English way of largely ignoring sort of codes and things like that, and we seem to manage to get away with it as long as what we do is accepted. So we've had an easy ride, and I think that it is going to be more difficult in the States, but you are going to have to shift. Some of your building codes will have to shift to be able to accept the notions of breathability, the notions of thermal mass, because it's something that your building industry has almost entirely ignored, our breathability and thermal mass.
Okay, well, I saw Glenn, you shaking your head quite a bit, and then you put your hand up, and I was going to call on you anyway. So do you have anything you want to add real quick, Glenn, or have a question?
No, I wasn't shaking my head.
Oh.
How presumptuous of you. No. Hi, Graham. It's very interesting. I'd just like to get your comments on prefabricated hemp blocks, like what ISO Hemp provides and other providers like Just Biofiber.
Yeah.
What do you think that means to your sort of business? Because I mean, hempcrete in situ is still a niche market. It's not mainstream building, and it's a lot more expensive. So how do you see that going?
Well, what I'd say is I wouldn't say it's a lot more expensive, interestingly. And I'd say of all the buildings in the UK, probably I'd say that 90% of the buildings in the UK have been hand cast or sprayed. So for us, it's the much bigger side of the market. We do occasionally use blocks. We use ISO Hemp blocks. I've never used the biofiber blocks. I think they look really interesting, but I've not actually used them. But what I would say is that, so in the UK, occasionally houses have been done. It was an idea that Will Stanix and I came up with back in 2013, and Will built the first hempcrete building where he put a skin of blocks on the inside of the timber frame and then hand cast on the outside of the frame. So you had the first sort of 6 inches of the wall was already dry and solid, and then the wet hempcrete that was cast on the outside, so it just dried to outside, which meant that it had the advantage of there was only one side you were shuttering up. It also had the advantage it was drying to the outside, so the inside was dry, and that was a very good way to build. That worked out really well. So he did that in 2013, and I started offering that to my clients as well. And then what would happen is I'd say to the clients, well, it will reduce your drying time. So they'd say, well, how much will it reduce the drying time by? So I'd say, well, you know, depending on a few factors, probably something in the region of 3 weeks, maybe 4 weeks you might gain. And then they'd say, well, how much, you know, how does that affect the price? So I'd price it out to just spray it, and I'd price it out to half spray it and half block it. And the half spraying, half blocking always came out more expensive. And so customers would say, well, if I do that, it's going to cost me another 4 or 5 grand. So, and I'm going to save 3 weeks. Well, I'd rather just have it all sprayed or all hand cast. So my experience hasn't been at all that the casting and spraying is niche or more expensive.
Okay, thanks for that. Yeah, no, that's just interesting because, I mean, we've got a company that supplies pre-made hemp blocks, and we have done hempcrete in situ before, and that was fine. But no, I'm just interested because, I mean, I think, look, let's face it, there's enough business to go around for everybody, regardless of how they implement hempcrete. And,
exactly.
And you're gone.
Well, I was just going to say, you know, I've used ISO Hemp blocks. Will has been making blocks. Will Stanix has been making blocks. You know, there's lots of different ways of doing it, and yeah, I would say that there are some things in the industry that I think, oh, actually, hold on, that's not such a good idea. But you basically blocks, casting, and spraying, all three of them straight off the bat are very legitimate, good ways of building. Sure. Then the panelized system is a slightly different. I think it's a slightly more complicated one in that there've been some very successful panelized systems in the UK. There's a few buildings that were made out of panels, and they were, as a building, they were actually very successful. But what they haven't been is repeated very much. And so I think there are still a lot of issues to be overcome with panelized systems. But, you know, blocks, hand casting, spraying, it's all good as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, I mean, you know, the blocks we're doing in Australia and the United States and New Zealand are made in France, and they're interlocking dry stacked blocks, so they don't require any mortar. Yeah. Obviously, they still need some sort of framing, whether it's timber or, you know, concrete and steel and so on and so forth. But I mean, I think I'm very encouraged that, you know, you're doing very well in the UK, and you know, hemp's getting a bit of a leg up from all of us doing all sorts of different things. So I appreciate you coming on and you know, explaining about what you do. It's great.
Thank you. Yeah. I mean, what I'd say over here is, for renovations, if you're renovating old properties, spraying hempcrete is the quickest, easiest, but rather messy way of dealing with it. I can spray buildings that you wouldn't really want to even try and hand cast. So that's where the spraying is really good, but the hand casting can be really good. And occasionally, for us, we don't do, the blocks make up a very small part of our work, but we use them occasionally when they're the right thing. And I think that even the renovation market, although I don't think we talk about it quite as much in the hempcrete world as we do new build, but getting the renovations of all the buildings that already exist is going to be absolutely crucial to climate change. And so for me, being able to renovate, and blocks can be a good part of that, but certainly over here, my experience has been, if I put a price in on a job, I almost always get the job. It's very, very rare that I don't get the job. And I'm not really competing with blocks, but I'm competing with lots of other techniques. But I pretty much always get the job, which tells me I'm not that expensive. In fact, I ought to put my prices up, really.
Maybe you're a really great salesman and you don't want to admit it.
Oh, well, I can't really judge that one. I don't know.
Well, okay. Well, thank you so much. I love who's on our call right now. I, again, just want to say thank you all very much for joining. There are some definite powerhouses here on this call looking to move the industry forward. And my goal is to help facilitate collaboration. So however I can help and assist in that, I'm all about that. Dirk, if you'd like to go ahead and ask, go ahead.
No, I just want to add a few things on the discussion.
Yeah, please.
I'm from Hemp, so I'm represent the producer of the blocks.
Yeah.
But I would just add, I agree that the price is very dependent on which system you use. If you use it with a timber frame, then you have an extra layer with the blocks. You can't put a block in between the timber frame. But if you have a self-supporting construction with massive walls, and the blocks are self-supporting, so then you have another price for your construction.
Yeah.
So what I agree is you have to use the system which joins the best for your type of construction, load-bearing construction, and that depends the brand. But what I experienced in the market is that the the contractors easily accept the system because it's you don't have to follow a lot of training. So a normal mason can use the blocks. That gives also at the end for the end consumer a different price, because if a contractor don't really understands the system, he will also add a surplus on it as a risk. Yeah. And also the constant quality. So this is very different. We can all the products are certified, so we can certify every block.
Yes. Yeah, I think
I agree that every system has its value, has its pro and its contras.
Yes, that's right. So I guess I would say that it depends what direction people want to go in. And I think for me, the notion of, hemp growing sort of in the future, if we look to the future, you say, well, okay, we need more hemp processing facilities. Okay. So if they come in, then we can have much cheaper hemp herd. We can do much more local construction. And I think for me, there will always be a place for all of it. But I really like hand casting or spraying as a technique. Will Stanix recently did a build where he used a post and beam timber frame and made some enormous blocks. They were I think in fact the ISO Hemp might do them, but they were sort of 600 by 300, so 1 foot by 2 foot, and sort of 15 inches thick. And he said it went together incredibly quickly, really easy. And what Will is always saying, what he really likes about the blocks, is the fact that whenever you want to stop for a cup of coffee, you can stop whenever you want to, because you haven't got a machine whirring away in the background. Well, of course, when we're spraying, we have to time when we stop, because we've got wet binder in the machine and we've got hemp in the binder in the hoses. So I think it's all horses for courses. I will carry on, I guess, doing what I know how to do and what works for me, but I'm open to it all. It's all good, really. Any hempcrete building is going to outperform any other kind of building. So whether it was put together as blocks or hand cast or sprayed, it's all good.
Okay, so great discussion here. This is something I'm actually curious about, as we're looking to really move the industry forward. John, you've got a great question. Graham, assuming that building codes are met, skilled installer base is available, and supply is sufficient and sufficient supply of product is endured, do you see manufacturers of cement or other substitute building materials potentially adding hempcrete to the product lines? Or do you see that only companies dedicated to hempcrete or other forms of non-traditional building materials offering the products? Do you see existing building material companies playing a potential role in scaling the US?
Yeah, I think they could. I mean, in the UK now, even the very traditional builders merchants that, if you look back at the history, when I first started building stuff sort of 40 years ago, it was difficult to buy a bag of lime 40 years ago because cement dominated the industry. And then about 30 years ago, there was a sort of a re-emergence and we started to get lime accessible. And now I can get lime fairly easily. It's still not as easy as cement, and if you do a course in plastering or a course in bricklaying, you'll do a year's course using cement mortar, and they'll give you a morning to explain lime mortar. So you can see that, the industry is a very uneven playing field, but it is getting better. And I think one of the things that will really make a difference is if governments impose carbon taxes on embodied energy. That is going to drive forward lime-based, hempcrete, all of those, because immediately there are carbon taxes on embodied energy. That is a complete game changer, and that will bring forth the investment in the processing plants and a whole host of other good stuff. So I think it is very possible and very doable, but we are going to have to look at things very differently. And there's some real, on a society level, there's some fundamental changes that need to happen, and we all know they need to happen, but we need to stop talking about them happening and actually make them happen.
Oh, I believe there's enough passion in this industry to make that happen. Seems like this industry has more passion behind it and behind our projects that are related to the big picture and circularity and sustainability and how we're all connected. And it's pretty awesome. Another question, Bill, I don't know if you're interested in speaking to this question or asking yourself, but Bill had a question about the Federal Trade Commission Rule 460 mandates disclosure of the R value certified by ASTM C16 testing in the residential construction in the United States. Without the certified R value, it's impossible to comply with the R value minimum. With the R value minimums in local codes. Do you know anyone willing to submit a sample of hempcrete for mandatory R value certifications?
Yeah, I mean, I think your United States Hemp Building Association is working on that at this very moment. I think that's what they're doing. But the interesting thing, I think it's worth explaining a little bit about R values. R values, or what we call in the UK U values, they're a very, very blunt tool for measuring the performance of a building. And the reason for that is they are a static test taken out in a laboratory that takes no account of any other external factors such as thermal mass or moisture regulation. So when they're calculated, if they calculate it on a piece of polystyrene insulation, it will give a fairly accurate picture of how that piece of insulation will perform. But if you do it on a natural breathable material that has thermal mass like hempcrete, they give a very different picture. So to give you an example, there was a Marks and Spencer's store that was built in the UK a good few years ago. And when they did the post-occupancy testing on the energy values, we have a thing over here called SAP calculation. So it's basically assessing how much energy a building should use given that level of insulation. So when they actually tested it in situ, the building used 60% less energy than predicted by its energy calculations. So they were using our value calculations to say, well, this building is going to use X amount of energy, but it used 60% less. Now, when a building outperforms an energy calculation by that much, the government really should be sitting up and thinking, hey, this is incredible. But when you look at it, the big difference between a hempcrete building, for example, and a standard building that's got, you know, a polyurethane based insulation in it is in a standard building with polyurethane insulation, the only thing that is warm in the building is the air, because there's no fabric of the building to actually warm up, because there's no thermal mass. So what happens is, if you open a door or a window, or you have a drafty building, they're the buildings that you stay in where the heating goes off at 10 and by 11 o'clock the house is freezing, because there's no fabric of the building. Whereas hempcrete will hold on to that heat till the following morning, till the heating kicks in. So it doesn't have that big diurnal temperature swing. And the other element is, because it's breathable, it's absorbing and desorbing moisture through the course of the day. So if you go and have a shower, or you're cooking, or you create what we call a moisture spike, the relative humidity in the room gets high, the walls absorb that relative humidity. So they're lowering the relative humidity in the room all the time. They're managing that relative humidity, which means that you can feel warmer at a lower temperature. So to give you an example of the opposite, because it's easier to understand, if you sit in a very damp room, it doesn't matter if the thermometer is telling you that you should be comfortable, you won't be comfortable because you're in a damp room. And the reverse is also true. If you're in a room with very low relative humidity in the 60% level, you'll end up feeling warm, even though the room is at a temperature that you think, actually, I ought to feel a bit cold, but I don't. And it's because we're super sensitive to moisture. So that's what breathability and thermal mass bring in. And it's not at all accounted for in the R value calculation. And I think that that is something that needs to be addressed to have a more even playing field. And I think that the United States Hemp Building Association are probably working on that too. They really ought to be.
I know, Bill, I don't know if you're still available or on. I know you work really close with them as well as ASTM. I don't know if you want to make a couple comments on that.
Yeah, that'd be great. Thanks. Appreciate everybody. I've got about 35 years in energy engineering, building science, HERS rating, on and on and on, and early days in passive solar and modeling of thermal mass with Transys and other modeling platforms. And I've got to say, there's misconception about whether a material can be both an insulator and mass. The science and the modeling platforms tell us it's one or the other. It's mass or it's insulation, and it really can't be both. Now, as far as the U.S. Hemp Building Association, couple problems. Standardization is the key to achieve regulatory compliance, and right now they're kind of stymied in refusing to set a recipe for hempcrete, which would make every single installer a manufacturer subject to FTC mandate on testing. So some of the block people, ISO, some of the other folks have a way of approaching it that could be tested from a factory built product and apply to anyone who uses that block. But on-site mixing, allowing a variation in recipe, like in concrete testing, just for compressive strengths and all that, you have a recipe that can't be varied. And then you can use the projections of compressive strength for that mix. But the building association keeps insisting that anybody should be able to mix it any way they want. You will never comply with FTC. You will never get the ASTM certification, and you'll never get a building permit. So I think just lastly, hempcrete will not cut the grass, walk the dog, and make your tea. Science is science, engineering is engineering, regulatory compliance, and the laws we have must be met. And so also the Building Association has spent a really long time at ASTM talking about sample preparation. And at the level we're at now, which is foundational research, the thing to do is to submit a bunch of different mixes to the same ASTM test and see what the variation in the mix is and start working towards a standard mix. Until that's done, on-site mixers will never ever comply with the building code. And so, you know, I don't want to rag on stuff, but, you know, we have a hurdle. Just lastly, everything you needed to know about regulatory compliance, you learned when you were 5 years old and you wanted to get on the roller coaster, and there was a sign, must be this tall to ride this ride. And the only way you're going to get on the roller coaster is to be that tall. It's the same thing here, regulatory compliance. You've got a minimum R value, and if you don't meet it, you don't get the building permit. You don't get to ride the ride. So if I can help in any way, I've been working at ASTM, particularly in insulation, for 25 years and got a good feel. I'm also on the Building Science Committee, which doesn't look at the insulation like Graham was saying, and looks at the building as a system. And total performance guarantees come from the building science approach, which looks at how air, heat, and moisture interact with each other, the building's parts and the occupants. As far as moisture control, that's all mandated by mechanical ventilation. You shouldn't need the walls to help you. That indoor air quality should be controlled at the architect stage, not at the walls shouldn't be part of it at all. Anyway, sorry to rag on, but I think we really need to solve the regulatory compliance and get all the paperwork out of the way if we're going to move the industry forward.
There was a good comment just now made, Ben. I don't know if you'd like to jump in. It says architects can specify specific or mix ratios just like we can with concrete or mortar if we have some mix ratios that have been tested.
Can I just say,
Please.
what I would say is to this, that part of what you're facing in the States is you can build really good hempcrete buildings, and really good hempcrete buildings, if they're hand cast, for example, which is much more difficult to maintain at sort of standards, there's still really good buildings that will perform really well. And the binder might be different, and the person that's tamping it might tamp a bit too hard or a bit too lightly, but they're still creating good buildings. Because when we get buildings tested over here, they do so well. To some extent, I understand the notion that it's got to meet all these different criteria, but you know, we have to meet criteria over here, which we meet, and the comfort levels that hempcrete houses provide are excellent. And what I'd say is that I know there's a lot of hurdles to jump through, but if we're actually looking at climate change and looking about doing something about it and building differently, we mustn't let the regulations say because it doesn't pass this and it doesn't pass that. We can't allow them to say we can't build it, because we know if we build it, it works. And we've built enough of them to know it works. So my feeling is that although you've all got to jump through your hoops, some of those hoops need to change, because we can't continue to do what we're doing. So when somebody says to me, we've got to standardize, if you're using a natural material and you're going to use local resources in terms of lines and line binders, there will be variability, and that has to be taken into account. You know, go back a few years, we used to build locally. We used to have a vernacular architecture, and I can see that if we're actually going to do something about reducing embodied energy, we're going to have to go back to that. So the regulations at the moment, they are standing in the way, but they don't have to. They are man-made regulations. So in the same way over here, we've adapted and we've moved around them, and we're able to build extremely good buildings that perform well. Like I said, 60% less energy. That individually, if you test hempcrete for thermal mass, it's not exactly impressive, but put it in a building and test what it's doing in the building, and you start to realize it's saving energy. So I think that part of the issue is whether or not it's possible with your system. I don't know. Obviously, I'm not familiar with the American system of how it all works, but what you can't afford to do is let the regulations stop you building well.
I agree. Glenn, I saw your hand was raised, and Ben, if you have anything else you'd like to add, feel free to jump in.
Yeah, I mean, regulations are very interesting. I mean, at the end of the day, what we're finding, it all gets down to the engineering, regardless of insulation. But I mean, all of the product that we use has all been accredited in Europe. The accreditation body is part of the ILAC, which is the International Organization of Accreditation Bodies. And there's a lot of countries that are member groups of that will essentially, look at tests that are done in other countries. And all these tests have been done on hempcrete known to man. Yes, all hempcretes aren't the same, but the ASTM standards, as I think you're saying, Bill, it's like, well, how can you get a standard test for material that's going to vary in the first place? There are already standards out there. I mean, hempcrete's been tested more than any other material that I can see as far as, new building materials or old building materials. So I suppose it's very interesting for me. Yeah, sure. There are all sorts of building regulations in Australia. We've got one building code, and we've got 550 local governments that implement the building code or certify it. And same in America, you've got lots of different states and building codes. But at the end of the day, we're finding it gets down to engineering. As long as the engineer is certified that ain't going to fall over, it seems to be going forward, regardless of insulation values. But anyway, that was just my comment.
Well, I'd add to that obviously all the buildings I work on have got a timber frame in, and it's the timber frame providing the structural integrity. I'm not using hempcrete as a load-bearing material. So actually, for me, mostly all the building regulations want to know is, does it meet the R value? And we build them thick enough that it meets the R value. So it isn't, for me, I can't see that we should allow the regulations to stand in the way. It's just relying on regulations to work our way out of climate change. It's just not going to do it. There's got to be access to variability.
Speaking of climate change, and I know that there's a few other members on this call that are involved in the X Prize. Are you involved at all, Graham, in the X Prize?
No, what's that?
Okay. So the drawdown hemp, a group, Bruce Dietzen has put a group together. There's a number of you on this call that are involved. Glenn is one, and they're calculating the carbon avoidance and sequestering of products, carbon sequestering.
Yeah.
And they do the life cycle analysis of all products basically, and then are presenting it. Elon Musk is giving away $100 million to the group that can calculate, or $50 million, sorry, 100 total, but the group that can calculate that they can sequester the most carbon,
right,
they're getting a prize. And so there's a whole bunch of people on our team that have got together to pull data together on, projects and construction and building materials and biocomposites. And so I'd love to invite you. I'll send you guys and anybody else that may be interested. It really is right now about calculating the data and compiling data so that we can, present. So if anybody does have information that they could compile, I think that it would be very beneficial.
Yeah. So over here, for the last 20 years, we've been compiling carbon footprint analysis on building materials, and there's a thing called the ICE database, which gives each building material an embodied energy calculation per kilogram of material. So by working out how many kilos of material of that particular material you're putting into the building, you can pretty much estimate what the carbon footprint of that is. And again, you know, with hempcrete, you're coming out with, you know, it's a carbon negative building material. We're absorbing more carbon than we're emitting during the, you know, in terms of embodied energy. And to put that into context, I was looking at a study a little while ago that said an average, because air buildings in the UK are much smaller than your buildings in the US, but an average small, you know, 3-bedroom house on a development in the UK would emit about 80 tons of carbon into the atmosphere if we build it in a very, you know, normal sort of, for England, a normal building pattern. It will emit 80 tons of carbon. And of that 80 tons of carbon, 48 tons will be emitted through making the walls. So if I were to build that same sized house out of hempcrete, I'm going to be using about 50 cubic meters of hempcrete, which is going to lock up about 5.5 tons of carbon. So the equation becomes, they're going to emit 48 tons, or I'm going to lock up 5.5 tons. So we're 53.5 tons of carbon better off for every house we would produce in hempcrete. Again, that's not even a close run battle. Well, there's a slight advantage to hempcrete. It's a clear cut. This is what we actually want. So for me, you know, that's why I do what I do, because, you know, if the government were really serious about cutting carbon emissions, they would be supporting the hempcrete industry, which of course they're not. I mean, I don't know how it works in the States, but Air Building Research Establishment in the UK was an independent body until the mid-90s. And since then, it's been part funded by industry. And I can tell you that the industries that are part funding it are the big polyurethane insulation industries, the OSB board industries, and all of the building materials that you see on every building site in the UK. They are the people actually funding the industry. So I would argue that's really why. I'm not actually funding it myself. I don't give them any money at all. And hence why we're still out in the wilderness a little bit.
Sure, sure. Thank you, Laura, by the way, for sharing the X Prize link. And Graham, I would love to connect you because I just think it would be a great value add. The goal is to create the open source platform, you know, to do the same thing and move the industry forward. John Carpenter, I saw that you had a question, and of course my Zoom froze on my computer, so I'm on my phone and only see half of your question. The part I see is, sorry, I meant hempcrete, not temperature in my last question. I don't know if you'd like to ask or if you have a question you want to address.
Yeah, thanks, Mandy. Thanks, Graham, for your time. I recall reading an article, it must have been about 10 years ago, that assessed the filtration value of air quality, indoor air quality of hempcrete. And I recall it being used in pediatric wards where they're assessing the impact on airborne particulates for kids that were suffering from upper respiratory issues like asthma. And I'm just wondering, that's a 10-year-old study. Has there been many studies in the UK recently that assess, as you talk about the filtration / moisture management, inherent capabilities of the material to improve the air quality of inside homes?
So what I'd say there is, I'm not aware of any scientific papers, and I keep a fairly good eye on papers. You know, I do tend to sort of look at them and assess. A lot of the research that's getting done is repeating and going over the same old ground. And I often have PhD students that want to do, you know, something about hempcrete referred to me, and they come along and we discuss what interesting questions we could examine with their thesis. And quite often the response comes back from the academics, Now, that question's not quite academic enough. It's a bit too industry based. And so I think, again, that leads people to then go to more mundane things with hempcrete that have already been looked at 50 times. You know, how can we get more hempcrete used in the construction industry is probably the most common paper I've seen. But one's on air quality and its ability to absorb electromagnetic interference. That's another one that we could do with being monitored. And what I'd say is, there's a house in Guernsey, one of the Channel Islands, that I built the house, and I've been back several times to work on other projects with the client. And she was the environment secretary on the island, and she found that people were, when they'd come to visit, they'd come and come around for coffee or whatever, and they would always say to her, have you got some kind of air filtration system going on? Because the air in here is always so clear and so fresh. And of course she hadn't. It was a simple hempcrete house with no mechanical ventilation or anything else. And that sort of theme has cropped up on numerous occasions, people talking about the freshness of the building. So it's anecdotal evidence, it's not scientific evidence. It's a very difficult thing to sort of put your finger on, but there does seem to be an element of air quality there. And in the same way, we know that if I build an internal hempcrete wall, it will block out the Wi-Fi signal, which is why largely I do exterior walls. I rarely do internal walls because people like Wi-Fi to bounce all around the house. So, and again, it's another area that hasn't been researched fully, but the anecdotal evidence, I know I've cut signals off for people by building walls and saying, look, you need to put another wire in here because you're going to lose your Wi-Fi. And they say, no, it'll be fine. And then I put the wall in and then they lose their Wi-Fi. So we know it's doing it, but more research clearly required. So I'm sorry, I don't know of a paper that's looked into it, but I think it's a well-recognized but anecdotal element of hempcrete houses.
Thank you.
Excellent. Great question. Jimmy, do you have any questions or anything you want to add?
No, I really don't. Thank you, though. This has been a
Absolutely.
really interesting conversation. Hempcrete is not something that I'm particularly involved in. But as far as building construction, when it comes to hemp, I'm more interested in the hemp fiber side of it and insulation more so than hempcrete. But it's been very interesting to listen and learn more about it for sure.
Awesome. Well, thank you very, very much for joining. Well, we're at about 5 after the hour. So we've gone right at our 1 hour, and Graham, I want to be respectful of your time. Are there any other questions or any other comments that anybody would like to add before we close up today? Graham, is there anything, I guess, let me ask this, how can people really support you, and what's needed from the association and the number of groups that have really come together to link arms and move this industry forward?
Yeah, it's interesting in a way. I mean, for me personally, I've got more work than I want, even as a contractor. And all quite often people in other countries say, oh, how can I start as a hempcrete contractor? And I could set somebody up. In fact, I'm in the process of doing it right now, setting somebody up with their own hempcrete business to do their own hempcrete, giving them what they need, training wise, all of that. But really what they then need is a client. Until you've got a client, you don't have a hempcrete business. And getting clients in countries like England, where hemp is, it's become established enough, that's I say it's relatively easy. There are more people that want hempcrete houses in the UK than there are contractors in the UK by a long way. I don't know if any of you, to what extent. I know we talk about UK being quite advanced with hempcrete, and I guess it, in some ways it is, but I was talking with Will a few weeks ago, and we were working out how many hempcrete buildings we think there are in the UK. And we think we could probably name 700 or 800 of them. There are probably getting on for 1,500 buildings, I would think, 12 to 1,500 buildings. And there's probably about 20 commercial buildings in the UK. So that's as far as we've got, but it's relatively easy for us to do it. But you need the clients, at which you kind of need people to be aware of hempcrete. And in these spaces, you know, people are all into hemp, so they hear of hempcrete. If I tell somebody in the UK I'm a hempcrete contractor, mostly their next question is, what's hempcrete? So it isn't commonplace at all. It is, you know, it's a niche market as it is, but it's a material with enormous possibilities. And I think we do need to somehow put pressure on the powers that be and ask them, really, do they really want to do something about carbon emissions? Do they really want to do something about climate change? Or are we, you know, are we just going to talk about it and pay lip service to it? And certainly our government is very guilty of that. But it's difficult for me to see what America needs, what, you know, how with your regulations, they work very differently to our regulations. And it's difficult for me to see what you need. From my point of view, what I'd say is I'm more than happy to coach people and talk people through, you know, their build, whatever, help people out. I'm more than happy to do that. But I live a bit in a very small world in a way. I'm not a member of really any organizations. I kind of do my own thing. I like building good buildings, but I'm happy to help if, you know, if people want some advice or whatever. And I think, you know, in the States at the moment, as long as once you start building, however you get there, as long as you control the installation process, I think, you know, it'll be a successful material, but you have to control that process. You can't give somebody a little course and then let them go off and start building a housing estate. So for me, like I say, I was lucky. I came into the right industry at the right time in the right country. It's relatively easy for me to do what I do.
Fantastic. Well, I really, really appreciate you coming on today. I would love to continue to collaborate.
Yeah, brilliant. Yeah, me too. Me too.
For just a second, my phone was muted. I had a call. But yeah, I would love to have you back on. I'd love to highlight, again, anybody else that is looking for past content or recorded content, log on to hemphallway.org and request an invitation to our platform. We'll go ahead and approve you, and then you'll have access within the platform. For those of you that are not members, we would love to have your membership and support so we can continue to do what we're doing, making connections, building relationships. There's a lot of members on this call, so I really want to give a thank you and a shout out. And then Bridget, I just saw you as well comment. There was you had made a comment earlier, Graham, about these, you know, finding the customers and who are those customers. And, you know, our goal within the association has really been to drive and penetrate some of those markets. And I saw in here, there's a lot of architects and engineers and construction companies or builders. And so please feel free to reach out to each other and connect with Graham so that we can get projects, you know, being built and really demonstrate. I mean, I personally am convinced I want to build some Airbnbs and build some homes ourselves, you know, through the association. And so, but I know that there's other organizations that are actively working on that piece. And so I'd love to support them and support you guys. So please, you know, use this time to now connect with each other and further these conversations. And Graham, if there's anything I specifically can do or anyone on our team, I said Kayla is logged on. If you are still on, Kayla, I don't know if you want to say anything, but yeah, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. Other than that, thank you guys.
Lovely, thank you.
Yes, absolutely. Anybody else? Like I said, I can stay on for a little bit longer. I'd love to hear if there's any members, if you guys have anything that you'd like to share about the association, and give maybe others that are not part of the association an idea of what it's like or why to join, why participate and support what we're working on.
Global Hemp is awesome, Mandi.
Thank you. Thanks, Daryl.
Yeah, Mandi, I would just say this is another great program. I mean, I try to make every one that I can, and I'm never disappointed. I learn something on every call. So continued great job on your part. I do have one question that just came to me, and I know that people don't want to listen to a boring banker, particularly late in a call. But as we talk about, in Graham's point, you don't have a business until you have a customer. Are there any opportunities for collaboration, for example, with the solar industry, because that is a better known environmentally friendly industry? And is there a way to collaborate with them to help hempcrete and other hemp-based products become better known among customers that are clearly paying attention to the environment?
Yes, there is. There's some stuff coming in Texas. I can't really announce a lot of it till the organization putting it on breaks it, but there should be some news coming next week.
Yes,
Great.
I do think there's collaboration as well. I, early on when I started this, interviewed a huge solar company out of interest because their customers are looking for more sustainable, the consumer market is definitely driving it. So I'd love to help initiate some of that, and we'll put that on my radar as well, Ross. Anybody else have anything they'd like to add?
Yes.
Go ahead.
Yeah, well, I mean, I've been a member of the association now for about 6 months, and I must say that it's a great investment. Mandy's connected us with a whole host of people, from those that are, that are growing and experimenting with various hemp varieties, because we want to see industrial hemp proliferate in the United States. So eventually we can manufacture in the United States. It's not there just at the moment. But yeah, I'm really pleased to be a member of the association and encourage others to join as well, because it's been the best $50 a month that I've spent. I can tell you, it's better than advertising.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I was saying this the other day. I was joking around with some of the guys from Westtown Bank, actually, Ross, and someone said something about the advertising and marketing and opportunities. And I said, well, I carry your debit card around, and I travel to all these events, and every single one of these events, I'm buying stuff, swiping the credit card. And I can't tell you how many people said, you bank with Westtown Bank? Like, how are they? What do they do? And so I've become a walking billboard for all of you. So I want to really just, again, say thank you so much. I'm really passionate about you guys being successful, because that's what drives our industry forward. So thank you for all of your support. Tomorrow, we've got a great interview live broadcast at 10 a.m. We'll go live on YouTube, Facebook, Twitch, and LinkedIn. And it's with Mike from Manitoba Harvest. And so it'll be a good live interview. He's had some great exits, great business advice. And so I'm excited to present what he's been working on as well. So outside of that, I hope to see all of you guys soon. Please don't hesitate to reach out if you need anything, if you'd like to connect. Shoot me a message, join Hemp Hallway. You can chat with us there, or anybody on our team. Other than that, thank you.